Good afternoon. I am Amanda Gutierrez. I'm the Vice President for Automotive Restoration at McPherson College. And even though I was listed on the schedule, I have completely passed the buck. And I invited Garrick, that's with a K, Garrick Green. He is our Department Chair of Automotive Restoration, to share a little bit with you about 3D printing and what it means not only in the field of auto restoration, but also in a broader concept in terms of technological developments in our society. Garrick is a graduate of McPherson College. He came to us from California originally, and after he graduated, he left for a while, and he came back and joined our faculty in 2001. He came back. He was a student when I was working at the college the first time, so I knew him as a student first. And so I wanted to just update you a little bit. I brought some newsletters, our auto restoration newsletter that you can take with you if you'd like when we're done today. But McPherson College has been a great support to our auto restoration program, and it's really a unique program on our campus, as many of you know. It's not only a technology-based education, but it also incorporates our liberal arts degree. And so our students are involved in choir, in football, student government. A couple of them were involved in the marketing group that our students formed, the marketing business called Etch. And so I really am proud of the students, and I'm equally as proud of the faculty and the commitment they have to passing along some of these lost skills that are involved in auto restoration, but also bringing our students along with some of the new technology. A year ago, fall of 2013, the auto restoration program, we determined that it was time for us to really look at where we were headed. The program had been around for quite a while. The advisory board felt like many of the objectives that they had set forth had been accomplished, and it was time for us to really look at it from a new turning point, what we needed to do with the program. And so Garrick and another one of our faculty members, two of our alumni, two of our National Advisory Board members, the president, Michael Schneider, and I had a strategic planning retreat and came up with a new mission and vision for that program. Our mission is to be the center of excellence for students who are serious about automotive restoration. And what that does is it sets the bar high. We want to be the center of excellence. It defines who the students are that we want to recruit, students who are serious about this pursuit. And it also affirms our core educational component of automotive restoration. You can imagine with young kids, kids coming in right now, they think cars that I grew up driving are old cars. So they look at cars from the 80s and 90s and they're like, oh my gosh, that's such an old car. And so part of our task is to grab these students who are interested in cars and expose them to a much broader world of cars. So you'll see some of them driving Model A's or Packards around town. And part of our goal is to really expand their understanding of the automotive world, and then to prepare them to go out and make an impact in the hobby and in the industry. And so we're really excited about that mission. It really directs everything we do and the decisions we make. And I think you will enjoy very much hearing from Garrick today about some of the things he's doing in the classroom and how they impact the student learning at McPherson College. So if you would please help me welcome Garrick Green.
We should be hot there? All right, we are. All right, thank you and welcome. This is a first for me, speaking on this particular subject as more of a specific subject. I normally work these kinds of things into the machining class that I traditionally teach, where we are learning manual machining and those kinds of things, and then just transition into some of this discussion. But one of the cool things that's been going on over the last decade, there has been a lot of technological advances that have allowed us to do things that we probably couldn't even imagine. Well, like Amanda said, I was a student here actually I started in '91. I couldn't have imagined at that time some of the things that we would be doing now. And so before we actually start talking about some of these things, I want to get a kind of a straw poll from you all. What kind of things, technological advances, have you seen in your lifetime? Just shout out the best of them.
The automobile.
Okay, the automobile available to most every person. Thank you, Henry Ford.
Internet.
Right? Internet, for good or bad or whatever. The internet has been incredibly. Cell phones, yes.
Ballpoint pen.
The ballpoint pen. So, there's an interesting story that goes along with the first ballpoint pen that could write upside down. Are you familiar with that story at all? Okay, so you need a little bit of gravity to feed the ink into a ballpoint pen. At great expense, NASA worked on this ballpoint pen that would write in space. Russia simply used a pencil. All right, so there's our tax dollars at work. Other things.
Calculators. I remember
Calculators.
working on the base, we had a huge one, and now there's so tiny little things.
The first one my parents bought was $400.
Oh, they had bigger ones.
Texas Instruments, you guys remember those? The amber numbers on there.
When we came to McPherson, we had television, and some of the other faculty members didn't have television.
Television, and then flat screen television, high definition television, where it looks like those people are right in your living rooms. Yeah.
I remember reading when I was in high school back in Fort Beasley that they would someday be using plastics in cars.
Yes. They've done that. Sure have done that. And a lot of cars anymore are just about as much plastic as anything. And
Well,
so,
plastic in everything. I mean, when we were
yeah,
kids, there was no plastic for containers and bags and everything else.
exactly. And like glasses, I would hate to be wearing my prescription now in actual glasses because they would tear my nose off. But yes.
But even our plastic is so high-tech now.
It is.
Compared to what it used to be.
Yeah, now we have all these fancy things like polycarbonate and a lot of our advances in plastics and other technologies have gone by the way of through aerospace and those kinds of things where, like the internet was originally, kind of a military concept and has been evolving and developed into more of it's a social, cultural tool now. So there are lots and lots of examples that we could come up with of technological advances. And I want to focus on just a couple of technological advances that are really prevalent right now that will have an impact on the automotive restoration industry and the careers of our students. Just real quick, a bit more about me in case you know of any Greens from the notorious Green clan of McPherson. So if you know John Green, Bob Green, go back far enough, Reverend John and Jenny Green, that was my grandmother and grandfather. They actually lived across the street over in those apartments and continued to work lightly all the way into their early 90s. So I do have family from around here, and although I grew up in the Los Angeles area, found it to be a lot like home. And so we've now been here. I've moved my family. My wife also grew up in the LA County area, moved them out here, and most everybody else has followed us. I guess pulling the first grandkids away at that really early stage kind of had some impact on that. So anyway, without further ado, we're going to get into, forward through a couple of slides here, and feel free as we go. Please ask questions if you have them, and it doesn't have to be about this. If you want to ask me anything else about the auto restoration program, restoring cars, if you want to ask me anything about machining, painting, those are the two main things I teach. And I'm an avid woodworker too. If you want to ask me anything about those things as well, feel free. Just make sure you get my attention and I'll try to answer those things. So first, before I dive into any of the things, and I just have a few PowerPoint slides to make sure I hit a few key concepts, but I want to describe a little bit about what I brought along with me today. So this machine here is a 3D printer. And if you recall, back in the 70s and watching Star Trek, they had this device called the replicator. And yeah, I didn't watch Star Trek back then, but it made things that would just kind of like show up on this tray. We haven't quite gotten to that point, but close. So this 3D printer, which I came and set this up about an hour or 2 hours ago, like 2 hours ago, started a print job, which I've stopped, and I've stopped it right at a kind of a almost done, 80% is what it's done. And so this has taken an hour and a half, will take an hour and a half total to do this entire print. So I brought that along, and as I conclude my portion of what I'm going to do, I'm going to set that thing back up and invite you guys to come around and just watch it work a little bit. It makes neat noises, and it's high tech. It's kind of cool. So after I'm done, we'll go ahead and get that started back up. If I start it right now, all of your attention will be over there, and won't hear a word that I say, which might be better actually. We'll start that up. So, okay. I've also brought along a couple of things that I will start at one of the tables here, each of these, and if they can just kind of come on back here towards the video camera, we'll collect those after I'm done. And just real quick, what I brought along is an example of a part that we needed to make. This is for I have a 1928 Oakland. Does anybody remember Oaklands? Oakland was the parent company of Pontiac before Pontiac was around. So my 1928 Oakland needed this part for its oil pump, and they don't sell them over at O'Reilly's anymore. So this is a metal example and a printed example of the housing for that oil pump. This that I'm sending around is actually cut in half so you can see the insides and see how that looks. It's got a honeycomb shape inside. So I'll start those here. That one.
Printer needs the red ones?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It works just as good.
This will not work in use, but I'll explain why I printed that part here in a minute. And then this piece here is an example of a part for a 1929 Stutz Blackhawk. Anybody remember Stutz's? The Stutz Bearcat was really the one to have. It was a race. It was a gentleman's race car. You could drive on the street. So the steering shaft that comes into this bracket was a 3-piece after it had gotten broken, and so now we have a part that is a whole part here.
Will that plastic last as long?
The plastic will not last as long, but it gives us the ability to go to another step, which will last as long. Yes?
That 3D printer, is that like the same thing they do in the medical world now to make?
Yeah, there are some things that are now being printed in the medical field. So, and I'm going to go ahead and pass this around as well. So this is the actual oil pump for my Oakland with a printed piece in place, so that you can see it's the right size. It's the way it should be. So I'll pass that around. Okay. So one of the things why these particular items and this particular process and some others that are related to it, why they're important and why they're beneficial in our program is, well, and I've mentioned it just a little bit before, some of the parts are just not available for cars. If you have a Model A, Model T, Chevrolet, a Buick, you can generally get most everything you need. If you have something that's a little bit oddball, you can't get parts. And so that's one of the main things. We're dependent on good parts availability. If we're going to restore a car that can go back onto the road, we need everything to be working properly. when my Oakland is back on the road, I want an oil pump that's feeding oil into that engine so that it doesn't seize up. And one of the things that we have trouble with is cost. Like, I could get a machinist, if I had to bill for my time to machine this part, very few people would be able to afford that particular housing that's needed there. So we also talk about this to our students, and when we do restoration work in our program, we have about 25 cars in process over there in that building right now. A lot of them are the kind of vehicles that we can get regular parts for. Model A's, Model T's, and then we have a good number of cars out of the 50s and 60s which have good parts availability. But some of our earlier stuff, they are very expensive to get a hold of if you can get a hold of them at all. And so that's one of the things that we have trouble with here with this Stutz and a car like the Oakland. Parts are just not available. If they are, they're very expensive. It didn't used to be that we would have other options on top of that. When we would discover, there are not parts available, we'd have to simply hand make that part or figure out a way to do without it, or maybe find a part that was available from a parts yard or salvage yard or something like that. All right, so we've talked about this and discussed those. And so I'm going to talk about a more general field starting out, and then we'll kind of narrow down. But there are a lot of different processes out there that go under the heading of non-traditional processes. That is, as a machinist, when I'm teaching my students to make a part, I want them to be able to use a tool to create a chip that's going to remove material from something. Non-traditional machining doesn't always work in that way. In fact, one of the non-traditional machining processes, it goes under the heading of additive manufacturing. And additive manufacturing would include something like the 3D printer, where we are starting with nothing, using some way of adding material to a build platform or something like that to actually make our part. Instead of whittling away from a solid block, we're actually making the part from nothing. So 3D printing, like I said, would be one of those things, additive manufacturing, but we need some other processes to go along with that to really get full impact from that. Those things would be 3D modeling. Any of you have any experience with drafting, technical drawing, any of that kind of stuff? No, nobody here? A little bit? Yeah. We used to rely on a draftsman sitting at a board and drawing out these parts, and they would be 2D representations of whatever we were trying to make. Well, now a draftsman, quote unquote, would sit down and work in a computer software that will produce a part in much the same way that additive manufacturing does. They will start with like if I needed to make this oil pump housing, I would start with something that was the shape of the outside, the profile, and then I would tell it to make it so big, and then I would start whittling away from that. And it would actually make a 3D representation of the part that I wanted to make. So all along as you're creating the part, it is looking like it's going to function like it's supposed to. And that takes a little bit of the machinist being able to translate the part drawing out of the equation, which is sometimes good and sometimes not if the draftsman messes up something. So, and then 3D scanning. I don't know if you're familiar. Any of you have any chance to read about or any experience with the NIAR program down here at Wichita State? That's National Institute of Air Research, I think it is. NIAR down there, and they've bought that big building right off of 35, I-35. They have rooms about the size of this room that contain these machines that can scan with a laser an entire wing. Take that scan and then put that into a drawing, and then you can manipulate that drawing. And in fact, some of this software is so good, they can take that and now put air across that wing, in the software. And how is that wing going to react? They can make minor changes to that and then see now how does that air react with that wing. And so all this R&D that used to take months and years for us to do is now being done in this like virtual realm of the software, where it knows the thermodynamics and the way air moves, and it can actually tell you, is this thing going to fly, before you actually build a single piece. In fact, the 777 built by Boeing was the first aircraft totally built in software before it was actually made. So it was theoretically flown before it actually made it out of the computer. And they were reasonably sure it was going to work like it should. So that's kind of a cool thing to be able to do, right? I mean, if you were a test pilot, maybe that was a really cool thing. Instead of being the guy who is either going to be, this plane may go down, or we're pretty sure it's going to fly. That might be a little bit of a reassurance to a test pilot, I would think. So, I'm sorry?
Oh, Howard Hughes would have liked that.
Oh yeah, I think he would have. He was a creative thinker like that, and I think he would be fascinated by this kind of stuff. I really do. A little bit of a recluse at the same time, but yeah, I think he would be totally fascinated
He
by
had the
this.
money to pursue it too.
Yes, he did. Yeah. And because of that money, he also had some very interesting cars built, I would say. So we're always looking at, hey, what kind of cars have these guys made over the years? So here's where we are now, and just a quick headline. So this is taken off of Wired from UK. There's the headline: NASA just emailed a wrench to space. This happened 2 weeks ago, I think it was. Does that not blow your mind a little bit? It's like, how does that work? Right? So somebody here designed in a software a wrench that they needed to well, first of all, they sent the email that was for the part that they needed to replace. So they had this part printed, but then they realized we don't have any way to install this part. So then they sent them the wrench. So it was kind of a two-step process there. And lo and behold, they've printed 21 different items in a 3D printer, much like this, in space, in plastic. All of those parts, minus the wrench and the one part that they just made, have actually been shipped back to Earth, brought back to Earth physically for testing to see how things, how does that react in space? Does it print differently than it prints here? And to me, that's just really fascinating. That's only one example. Have you heard of other examples of 3D printed parts? Medical, and what kind of things have they printed?
They're trying to do to build a new valve and stuff like that, heart valves, instead of having to do other, things like that.
Yes.
Is their goal.
And they're getting really close.
Yes.
Yeah. Other things, have you read about any other uses that you maybe have been in the news lately? Last summer I toured the University of Louisville, Kentucky, and they have a really good program that has a lot of this type of technology. And of all the different things that they printed, and they've printed thousands, probably tens of thousands of different parts. The part that they printed that they've gotten the most impact out of, both from the human interest side and for the, let's be honest, publicity side of it, was they printed a heart. This heart was the heart for this one boy who needed a surgery to repair, I forget what it was. But because they could basically scan the heart and all the different layers, they printed this in a more of a kind of a foamy type of medium, plastic. And so the surgeon had already done the surgery 2 or 3 times before they actually had him on the operating table, because they got down to the layer where the repair was to be made, and they've already gone through it. So that was sped up. They know exactly what to expect when they got there.
They got to practice.
They got to practice. Yeah.
And when you were talking and asking that question, I thought we could just turn on the internet and ask the internet a question, and it would tell us how we use that machine to quickly we would have an answer.
Yeah, we would quickly have an answer. And over the last decade, the amount of things that have been done using 3D printers, is just escalated tremendously. And that's, one of the good things about a technology starting to take off is not only is it used more, but once it's used more, now the devices used to do that come down in price. A machine like this is going to cost about $3,000, $4,000 if you just buy one. And if you go on Instructables.com, you can read 20 different articles about how to make that yourself out of spare parts. You just order your parts, and there's actually this whole culture of you get parts from somebody who made their printer, and the only thing it costs you is you agree that you're going to print 10 more of whatever it is, so that the next guy who makes his, you're providing some parts to him. And it's kind of this circular, it keeps feeding itself. And so, you could build, if you were building one of these, you could build one quite large. In fact, 3 weeks ago, the Detroit Auto Show had a guy there. He was printing a car, and one of our students actually got to ride in this car. They printed everything but the engine and the tires and the wheels, I think it was. Printed everything. It was an electric car, but imagine how customizable that could be. You look at the picture and you go, I want the seats just a little more laid back so I can really ride in comfort. Or, no, I need, I'm 6'7", I need more room there. Okay, click, done. More room. And so the technology has really taken us to places I think we could have hardly imagined years ago. So, 21 objects printed in space. That's pretty fascinating. Many of them, as I understood from the article, were for research and just didn't necessarily go to anything. The thing that was really interesting about the emailed wrench is they needed that to keep the mission going. This is on the International Space Station. So, okay. So talking about the 3D printer itself in just a little more detail, I'll describe what it's intended to do, what it does, and walk through a couple of these points. So it's capable of making complex parts, and I think you have been able to see that from the parts that have come around. By no means are these the most complex parts, but these are the parts that I've needed to print for ourselves over at the college, and so that's what we have. But it can do just about anything. If a part needs a hole in the middle, if it's supposed to be hollow, it will skip that as it's printing. And it will be hollow in the middle, even though there's no way to get to it. It can print very thin objects, and the better machines you can get, the resolution gets better too, which means it'll be finer and finer. So one of the things that I want to talk about here briefly, and one of the reasons why I printed these parts for the Oakland was I just wanted I would need this out of aluminum or some other material to actually work in the engine of my car. But before I went to the expense of putting this in a machine or actually chucking it up and buying a $40 piece of aluminum, it was really inexpensive for me to say, come over here, plug in my program and print that part and drop it on there, turn the gears. Yep, it works just like it's supposed to, as opposed to making a part that maybe I had a dimension wrong or I wasn't sure it was going to work for some other reason. And so proof of concept is a really interesting use of 3D printing. It's very inexpensive. A roll of the filament that this machine uses is about $45, $50 by the time it's shipped. And a roll of filament will last a long time, by the way. So there we have.
Can you recycle that once you're done with that part?
Yeah.
Can you put that through the machine again?
No, not at this point. I would expect as these machines are around longer, there will be some way of doing that because it is the type of plastic that could be used again. It could be made liquid again over and over and used that way.
So you really wouldn't use that part in your car?
Not that particular part.
You wouldn't use it as a plastic part?
Nope. But before I went again to the expense of machining that part, I wanted to make sure it worked like it should. So, and then wherever the aluminum block is, this is what the finished part would end up looking like. Right here, and this would be able to withstand the heat and the wear as the engine ran. So, proof of concept, good way to go about utilizing these machines. So I was hoping to bring one more example with me today, and I didn't get a chance to, but this piece made for the Stutz Blackhawk, we had one of our faculty members over in the art department was going to be doing some casting in bronze over the January term. So I gave her one of these, exactly like this piece I'm holding in my hand. And I said, would you try casting using this plastic piece as a mold? And so she and her husband, if you all know Ann Zerger, that's who I'm talking about, referring to, they went ahead, put this in their sand and added some features to it so we could actually get the bronze to it, and then put this in an oven, the sand and all that in an oven, burned out the plastic at about 1,000 degrees, and then that leaves a cavity, a void, and she poured that, and now we have a bronze piece, which is what we can use. And so, we have the capability to do some foundry work within the auto restoration program. That's one of my main interests in this technology, is being able to say, I can't get this part, sit down and get on the computer and design the part, get it made so I can have a representation, just about dropped it there, and make sure that it looks right, has the right dimensions, and then go ahead and cast this part in a metal. And then it will be usable. We could just lightly sand it, throw a little paint on it, and nobody will ever know that it's not the original part. In fact, I can even put the numbers on the side of it that were originally there in the real casting. And that's really what we're looking for, especially as something to pass along to our restoration students as they go into their careers, is if they have some way of being able to produce a part that looks better, as good or better than anybody else can produce, and they can produce it at a inexpensive enough rate to where somebody's going to buy it, they have a niche market where they can really, be of use and make a nice living in that restoration area. So currently we can print in metals. We being, the industry can. And in fact, down at Wichita State, they have a machine that they're just getting up and running that can print aluminum, can print titanium, and magnesium. We're talking about a couple $1 million machine versus a $4,000 machine. But the capability, again, is there, and it's just a matter of time before the price starts dropping, which will be pretty fascinating if we can print both in plastic and in metal. That's going to be a game changer in the automotive industry, as well as many other industries. We go back to the medical, and what if we can print anything that was needed? Valves, knees, hips, print glasses and things like that. Yeah, and a lot of these machines are actually ending up in third world countries where medical the attention that they can receive in a medical facility is very basic. But if they can get somebody to scan a leg for somebody who's maybe stepped on a mine of no fault of their own, they stepped on a mine, and they can then print them a prosthetic leg, that's going to be massive as far as the ability to produce something that would have otherwise cost something that would be impossible for somebody in a third world country to buy, and yet it was only a matter of many.
You say these machines will become common in homes after a while?
I say, why not? Could be. I don't know what uses they might have in a home, or like a small shop in a home, but that print up a Tupperware container. That's something that we Americans are pretty good about, is doing a little head scratching and say, how can I make this be useful for something else? And
well, would it be very useful for like people who are wounded in combat, lose an arm or a leg?
Yeah. And the neat thing is, one of the other articles I've read recently is they made a prosthetic hand for this girl, and it cost, I don't know, $400 compared to $400,000 or whatever another metal prosthetic would cost. And they have that information, and as her body, she was a teenager or young teenager, as her body grows, which it's going to, all they have to do is change some dimensions and they can print her another hand, at a very low cost. And so, yeah, that, I don't know where this will end up being, but, we're pretty good at finding uses. In some cases, very useless uses. In other cases, very useful things like prosthetics. And like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if glasses and those kinds of things would not be somewhere on the horizon. Because if your prescription's anything like mine, I'm spending $700, every time I go to get glasses because of the prescription. Well, maybe we can bring that price down through a machine like this. So printing in metals, that's pretty fascinating stuff. Obviously, takes a lot of juice, a lot of electricity to do that, and so you have to have a facility that can accommodate. But if you do, gosh, I'm waiting until Wichita State, warning here, Amanda, when Wichita State is done with their first metal printer and they're going to upgrade, I think we need to, get our noses in front and say, hey, what are you going to do with that machine? Okay, so some of the obvious things that 3D printing and other additive manufacturing and these other processes will do and will be impactful for restoration students is it should bring manufacturing costs down, especially for those most obsolete parts that you really can't get. You have to have a economical way of producing them, and I see this as being the wave of the future to bring that level of economy into the reproduction of parts. Should permit us to produce higher quality parts. One of the limitations and one of the things we see all the time with reproduction parts is, yes, they're available, but they're barely of a quality that we'd actually want to use, and require lots and lots of rework to actually make them right. That's a matter of economy. I mean, the manufacturer of that reproduction part didn't make it as good as it could be because of economic constraints, not because they didn't have the ability to. But they've got to make a decision. You know, I'll be able to sell 50 fenders a year of this particular model and make. You can't really spend over the moon to make that part be absolutely precise if that's the only number of units that you might be able to produce. Obviously, if you can sell 500,000, then they can increase the quality and amortize that over a lot more parts. And, you know, I mentioned it before, we've alluded to it in a couple of the comments that were made. The future is really kind of limitless. There's a lot of possibilities that are out there of uses of this kind of thing. So, comments or questions? Yes, ma'am.
You have to be able to communicate with that machine as to what you want made. I mean, you just can't whisper to it and say whatever.
Yes.
I mean, you have to be,
Yeah.
you have to, I'll give that part. I mean, is
Okay.
that all on the computer?
I'll walk you through the process pretty quickly. So the first thing that I will do, okay, student brings me this part and he says, as a machinist for the restoration program, can you make me another one of these? Well, that's pretty complex, and the way it's shaped doesn't lend itself to being machined. It's more of, it needs to be formed somehow. So I sat down with my measuring tools at my desk in front of my computer, and I actually sketched it first with a pencil. Sketched it first, writing down all the key dimensions, and then I started plugging those dimensions into the software. We use a program called SolidWorks. It's basically a drafting software. So you're doing your drafting in this virtual world of on a computer screen. So as I tell it different dimensions, where things are supposed to be, then it starts to basically form this 3D representation, only it's whole now, not broken. And then when I say, okay, looks good, I am confident my numbers are right and it looks right, then I will save that as a separate file. It's called a stereolithography file, and basically it's just a couple thousand to hundreds of thousands of actual data points that make this kind of point-to-point structure representing the part. I send that stereolithography file to the machine. I can either do that wirelessly, which is kind of cool, or I can use a thumb drive, which is also very handy. And we haven't done it yet, but we could just wire this up through a cable right to my computer. And I send it to the machine. Sorry, there's one other step there. This is a MakerBot machine, and MakerBot has this, what they call a desktop. Basically, it's a landing pad for that file that I sent over. It'll allow me to move the part around. It'll allow me to change its ratio. So if I had a small part but I wanted to make a bigger representation, I could tell it to make a bigger version. Or if I needed to be smaller, I could tell it to scale it down. I'll give it some different parameters about like the resolution. and then I just tell the machine to print, and it starts printing. And then we just get to sit back and watch it go. So the prints that I've done have gone anywhere from this runs about an hour and a half to the oil pump runs about 2.5 hours, although if I turn up the resolution a little bit, it's more than 4 hours. So you can give it some different parameters. If you got to see the kind of the inside of this piece that had been cut apart, you can see it's got a honeycomb structure in there. I can tell it to fill more or fill less, and obviously the more it fills, the more filament it will use and the longer print time it will have, but it really doesn't change its strength. I can squeeze on that pretty good without really deforming it. So it's actually easier than you might imagine if you have the right software to make the original drawing. I was surprised how well this worked. Yes, Dr.
So
Garrick.
how expensive is it if you make a mistake in what you tell it to do and it prints something you don't want?
Not expensive at all. Each one of these prints probably costs about less than $10, which is not bad. I mean, that's not bad at all.
Are students at McPherson on restoration being taught how to measure and put that information on the computer and then go right there? I mean, is that what our kids are learning?
So they are definitely learning how to measure and be able to sketch this out. It's not required that they take the drafting course that teaches the software and will result in them printing this, printing their part up here. That's not a requirement of them, at least not at the moment. So, but they can, they can take the CAD course, and the CAD course, they learn how to do the drawing, and then they will be able to send their part to the machine and actually print it, which is a really good feedback. And I think that's another area where this is particularly useful that I may not have mentioned before, is it's a good feedback. You did something, and especially if you can see that it's right, that's a good feedback for students. So
If I'm a graduate of your program and I go out and get a job, and the car I'm working on needs this, I would hire you to make a part like that for me because our little shop doesn't have that.
Mhm.
Is that the way that works? I mean, most of all the restoration little garages or however they do it, wouldn't have that. So they would call back to McPherson and say, I need this, or to some place that makes parts like that.
yeah, they could possibly come back to us with a request for that kind of thing, and I kind of like doing this, so I might, if I could fit it into my schedule, certainly I'd do that for them. But they probably could afford the software to do the drawing. In fact, anybody who takes the drafting class gets a 1-year free license from the company anyway. So especially if they haven't been gone long, they probably have that on their computers. And then as far as the printing, there is probably a dozen different companies across the country who, if you send them an STL file, or there's any number of other files, they will print that for you in probably 100 different materials depending on what you want. Now there, you might be talking about a couple $100 to print something, but if it's in a durable material, how much might that part cost to be machined? Thousands of dollars probably, depending on the complexity of the part. So there is a nice network of, you don't have to have this machine in your shop. You can send it to somebody who that's all that they do. And in fact, these shops will also print in metal. So you can tell them, hey, I need a bronze printing of this particular part. Again, it might be several $100s, but it might be worth it. There's a shop up in Wisconsin that I visited here a couple of years ago, and the main thing that they restore is vintage Ferraris and competition Ferraris. Incidentally, if you had a chance to buy a Ferrari back in 60s or whatever, and you passed on it. Oh my gosh. These things are going, if any of these competition Ferraris come up for sale, they're often bringing 20, 25, 30 million dollars now. It's like, whoa, that was a beat up race car at one time that nobody cared about. So you take this beat up race car that nobody cared about, and now somebody wants to restore it and put it out on the lawn at Pebble Beach, which is the Super Bowl of car shows. If I'm missing that piece of trim that only appeared on 6 Ferraris ever made, I'm probably going to be willing to pony up for $2,000 to have one printed, as opposed to maybe $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 if there was one laying around somewhere in Italy, because they're obviously going to know what it's worth. And so it opens up a lot of possibilities, and this shop up in Wisconsin has been really forward thinking and on the front edge of this technology and utilizing it to their advantage. And in fact, they do a lot of work for other companies that are around, big companies like Miller Welders, and they're doing these print jobs, 3D print jobs for these big companies, and they're a restoration shop. Now, they're a big restoration shop, but they've found another way to kind of maximize their income stream. Yes?
So is there a percentage of parts you can print for something before it ceases to be a restoration and is now a reproduction?
Yes. Yeah, surely there has to be, some threshold there. I don't know what that is. And most likely it will be many years before we get to that point where the only cars that are still left that we can restore are so far gone that there's nothing left of them, really. There's still a lot of cars out there where I don't think we'll run into that just anytime soon. But yeah, eventually. What is the story about George Washington's axe that he used to cut down the tree? The head has been replaced twice and the handle's been replaced 4 or 5 times. Is that still his axe? Right? Certainly wasn't the very first iteration of it, but and we have to kind of answer that question on a pretty regular basis. I'll tell you what our goal in the restoration program is. We try to use as much original fabric, meaning any piece of metal, fabric, plastic, rubber, whatever the case may be, glass, as possible, in order to try to maintain as much authenticity as we can. So, and that has changed somewhat what we're looking for in any new acquisitions for cars as well. We want to acquire cars and vehicles being that, we also look for motorcycles. We want stuff that's not just becoming dirt again. It's like we're probably not going to be going and digging cars out of hedgerows much unless it's super rare. So, yes?
How many cars does McPherson College own, or do they not?
We have 25 cars in process, so we at least own 25. We probably have another 15 in storage. We have 30, 40, almost 40 cars-ish, if you count the motorcycles that we own. So we have enough for now, but a true car guy will never admit to having enough cars.
And that's where I come into it.
And that's where Amanda comes in.
I'm not a true car guy. So I'm okay with getting rid of some of them.
What? No. Okay, yeah, we can get rid of some of them as long as we bring something in that's better. Yeah. So, yeah, we have we have 100 years of restoration work. If between the cars that we have, might be a slight exaggeration, but there's a lot of work there. Other questions, comments? Did I have something? Amanda, you wanna?
Warm that, and I'll crank it up.
Okay.
Let's see.
All right, so you'll hear some noises coming from this machine as it begins. What it's going to do, okay, so let me describe just briefly how this thing works. Can you see this white line that's up here on top? That's simply a liner and a guide that feeds what is essentially a fancy string trimmer line. There's a filament that's on a wheel in the back that looks a lot like string trimmer line. So that's feeding up and into right at this area here, and you'll see this guy take off as soon as it's warmed up. So it's at 71 degrees Celsius. It needs to come up to 215 degrees Celsius. So it'll warm up. It feeds into that heated head, and then it just deposits a small line of the molten plastic down as it moves. Think of it as a super, super fancy hot glue gun.
Basically, that's what it is.
That's basically what it is. Yeah. So instead of glue, it's putting down plastic. Incidentally, this print will not be as durable as my other prints that I've done because it doesn't like to be stopped. It likes to put plastic down on top of already warm plastic. So it tends to break wherever you have a pause. But I wanted to get something partially printed for you guys to be able to see and then let it finish the process as we were winding up. So there you go. The future's pretty bright with the types of things, and I would expect that every couple of months you'll read a headline that will say something about an additional use, a new thing that has been done with 3D printers probably for the next decade, I would say. They're even toying around with printing tissue, human tissue. There's supposedly a machine somewhere, I think this was Europe, where they are printing a hamburger. I don't know how good that would be. How do you print lettuce? I don't know. But maybe it's a bare bones hamburger, probably. But if that really were to take off, what are the other implications? Well, we could put, we could place available food in places that you couldn't before. Whether it be military use or whatever. Printed on the space station, printed food.
There you go.
What's-
Get on the space station, just email it through that.
Yeah. Now you have to have the raw material. You have to have the filament, or you have to have
Yeah,
the.
but it'd be all liquid.
It'd be all liquid.
It's
Yeah.
easier to transport liquid up there than the actual take up space.
Yep. So here she goes. So what it's going to do is it's going to start filling in. It will do the honeycomb shape, and then you'll hear it start to make some really fascinating noises as it does the peripheral, as it starts to profile. So there we have it.
So I would encourage you all to come up and get a closer look because it's really quite fascinating to watch. I'll have these newsletters at the back if you're interested in taking one of those. We have some really fun articles in here. Not only does it talk about the mission of the program, but there's a feature on the women who are in the program this year. We have about, I think, 8 young women who've enrolled in the program, and that's kind of exciting to see that many pursuing their dreams in what is traditionally seen as a man's world. There's an article on the 3D printer, and then also some stories about our students and what they do in the summer during their internships. And so I would encourage you to read about this. It's really one of the many neat programs at McPherson College, but it's often one that a lot of people don't know about. So thank you, Garrick, and we'll see you all next month.